Hello! It's a great pleasure to join you. My name is Justin Hollander, and I'm a professor at Tufts University. We're just outside of Boston in the United States. Really a great honor to be able to participate in the conference. I am going to talk about some of my research that I think would be relevant to some of the themes that I've read about in the conference proceedings. The idea of using biometrics in systematic and organized fashion in a way to study the urban design and architecture is really what I'm here to discuss. So while as I understand, New Zealand has not been so very severely impacted by COVID-19, so many other parts of the world have, and so what we've really seen is a real shift in how public space is being used, just pure access to it. And I feel like that's kind of like a way for me to kind of organize some of what I want to talk about today in light of the challenges of designing the public realm, the places that people spend time outside and interact with each other. Because we don't want to forget the fact that people really like seeing other people and being near them. These are just a couple images of public spaces, and what we know from tons of research is that as a social species, we need to be around other people. And so when we think about some of these restrictions that have been imposed due to the pandemic, it does raise these questions about how are architects and urban designers purposely shaping the public realm and shaping these public spaces to try to make sure that people can still do well in terms of our needs as a social species. So what I want to do is talk about a certain perspective, for approaching this kind of research. And so I need a few minutes just to kind of introduce the perspective, and then I'm going to talk about some studies that I've done that follow up on it. So, first of all, the question about how people even perceive their surroundings, that question has to be answered through an understanding of evolution. That it's wired into our brains to be able to respond to certain environmental cues in certain either positive, negative, fight, flight, happy, sad reactions. And these are hardwired. These are not culturally specific. And that there's been just a tremendous flow of new research in neuroscience, psychology, evolutionary biology, related fields of medicine that have helped us understand that there are certain patterns, certain shapes, colors. There's other people that looking at other people that generate autonomic responses that we are not controlling. And that's what this is trying to illustrate, that the mind is like an iceberg. It floats with 1/7 of its bulk above water. Back in the 19th century, Sigmund Freud was saying this. And so this automatic response has just been so very well documented. The number actually is a lot lower than that. In fact, actually, our experience of the world in conscious way is actually very small. But if we can understand that portion of the human mind and body that's kind of below the surface, we can do a much better job of putting people at ease in our designs. So what I'd like to do is kind of walk through the principles of cognitive architecture. There's 5 of them, and so just kind of explain what they are. Just give a quick visual cue of these images. So the first principle, and I do want to mention that these principles are not new, but what they're a reflection of the latest science that helps us understand how people experience the built environment. And so there may have been, for example, in the case of edges, quite a lot of prominent architects and designers who've written about the importance of edges. But now we have empirical proof that's come through scientific experiments. So as pedestrians, as we were walking along here in the Piazza del Campo, so we're wall-hugging species. This Greek word thigmotaxic, where we're actually really drawn to these edges, and that the more well-defined these edges are, which in this case the Piazza del Campo is really well-defined, it encourages us to walk, and it's not an accident that certain plazas and public spaces like this one have for centuries remained extremely popular. Next principle is that patterns matter, and that we are primarily visual in our relationship with external stimuli, and that we relish visual complexity and look for that stimulation. But here's the thing: it's not just any patterns. A lot of research has actually helped us see that the main pattern that we're always kind of scanning the world looking for is the pattern of a face, which you see in these two exemplar images. But the fact is, most traditional architecture uses the kind of arrangement of fenestration and doors to remind us of a face. Now, shapes carry a weight too, that we are pre-programmed, and just like in the other ways and other principles, to be looking for bilateral symmetry and curves. You can see this example of the Chambord Castle has both those elements, and actually quite a lot of the classic, timeless buildings that we come back to again and again in our memory, in our collective memory, have these elements. Now, storytelling is key. The ability for us to remember places, to connect with them on an emotional level, to make them close to us and tie them to our connection, has to do with the fact that they have a beginning, middle, and end, that there's a plot, that there's conflict. Places do that. Really good places do that. In this example of Villa Lante, a 16th century garden in Italy, where as you traveled through, it told you a story, and it was a story of the rise and fall of man, with illustrations in the form of sculpture and topiary and whatnot. But you go to Disney World, they do the same thing. They know how to take you through as you enter and as you go through the experience of being in a place, telling that story. And actually, I was in probably the most well-known architecture firm in Boston, Sasaki. I was in their offices, and right as I walk through the building, the first thing I see is a plaque, and the plaque speaks to the story of the building. So as you first walk in, you look to your left and you read about the fact that this had used to be a factory and now it had been converted, and the role the firm played in redesigning it and rebuilding it, and how they occupied. I mean, the story infuses the experience as soon as you get in. And the last principle is that nature is our context. Biophilia, this kind of idea of love of nature, that this is central to what we need when we look out into an environment. The acacia tree here in the African savanna, which is believed to be where humans first evolved. We always want this. This is something that we're always seeking. This view, this looking out at nature. Okay, so we're only aware of about really 5% of what our brain is doing. So in much of the research that I've been doing since I wrote this book, I mentioned Cognitive Architecture, I've been looking to try to empirically see how these principles play out, and been using a bunch of different tools. I've used EEG, but really focusing lately on eye tracking and eye tracking emulation software, so that we can understand and predict what's happening to people in these areas. So this is like a setup for an eye tracking lab, if those of you who haven't seen it. So up here there's a camera, down here there's another camera trying to track the person's eyes. This is like a test in the beginning where it shows you where how it makes kind of tracks where the eye is going. So it's actually what it's doing is mapping the path the eye takes on an image, helps us understand our unconscious response. So the other tool that I've used, the mega company 3M has developed a tool. They own a tool called Visual Attention Software, VAS. It uses an algorithm to predict where a person might look during that pre-attentive, that key, kind of the first 3 to 5 seconds when we look at something. So it allows us to predict where people would look if you're doing like a new design. It helps us reveal what's kind of hidden in an image. And it can really let us know how welcoming a place might be, and in really many ways helps us assess kind of how stressful a place might be, depending on where people are looking at on the image. So I got a video for you here. This is an example in the Stapleton Library in New York City, how the person is, how the tool really kind of captures where she's looking as the image is presented in those first 3 to 5 seconds. That's what we're looking at most. So what we did is we photoshopped the image. Originally, the original image was very face-like, had great bilateral symmetry, a lot of visual complexity. So we kind of took all those things out and wanted to see what happened. Now, what I'm showing you are just the eye tracking results just from these two subjects, just to kind of see how it works. But you can see immediately that he's not really taking in the whole building. He's just really just focusing on that center. Well, as it turns out, when you look at all of the data for the 60 subjects that we ran through this study, what you see is that systematically they really fail to kind of take in the whole building when the windows have been removed from the left and the right side. So clearly there's something going on here. This is another way to display the results. This is a heat map. Well, one thing that's really quite interesting here is that in the heat map, you're seeing the areas of the most concentrated attention, which in both examples it's that kind of center area. But in the photoshopped out one, it's they're not taking in the side. Another really kind of interesting, powerful tool here is this idea of TTFF, time to first fixation. It helps us understand how quickly someone looks at a certain element in a building. So the other example I want to talk about is a research project I did in Devens, Massachusetts. So just this is to help orient you. This is Boston over here. And then just outside of Boston, a redevelopment project for a former military base. And what they were doing here was trying to really focus on the public realm, use the architecture, urban design, landscaping to try to create a sense of place, try to create a place where people were going to remember and be attached to a neighborhood, something a little bit different than what's really conventionally designed and built in the United States and much of the Western world. So this kind of alternative development style has actually become increasingly popular as an experiment, but it's always just been an experiment. So we wanted to see empirically, like, well, does it do any good? Does it have any benefits, this kind of design? So this was this Chance Street that we studied, and you can see this was what it looks like as built. So one thing that was really fascinating that came from this was when we looked at the main area, like essentially main drag where pedestrians are welcome and whatnot, you could see that people really do fixate on the buildings, and even in the order that they fixate. This shows you as the person is looking at the image, first they look here, then here, then here, and then here. So the design is actually drawing them in and encouraging them to walk, which is a huge thing in such a project. What you see here is the back alley behind these buildings, which is not a pedestrian-oriented place. It's actually not really a place designed for welcoming, and you can see it really fails. Particularly if you look at the visual sequence diagram here, you see that the person is not drawn to kind of want to walk down there. I don't know if you yourself, you're looking at this image on the bottom right and you're like, I wouldn't want to walk there. Well, it's true, you wouldn't. So on an unconscious level, we can kind of map where people might want to walk and where they might not want to. So in many of the examples that we looked at, we saw consistently that columns and flags grabbed our attention. I mean, columns and flags. Since the beginning of humanity, people have had flags. This is such an ancient practice, and columns too. Since antiquity, people have been using columns to build, and here we see it. We see it really starkly that the columns and the flags are the things that really draw people's eyes. That's where you see the greatest contrast. And think about this is just still, but you can do eye tracking like this in a video format. You can imagine that a waving flag is probably going to be even more effective at attracting the eye. And then this question of first fixation, where does a person look at first? You can see that it's the flag that tends to draw it in both of these examples. The eye goes essentially right to where the flag is, and that's the first place you look. Helps orient the person viewing. So doing this eye tracking, we don't know how people are angry or disgusted or happy. I mean, we don't know all those details, so you really do need to use other tools. You can use different types of, I mentioned EEG, you can measure brain waves. There's something called facial expression analysis where the camera really is looking at the muscles in your face and how they move. Are they frowning? Are they smiling? So these are all very powerful. You can use heart rate to measure various indicators of stress. Skin conductance monitors as well. And then self-report. You can just ask people, are you happy? Are you not? And then there's this lab that we work with in a lot of these biometrics, and their biggest customers are Honda, BMW, and GM. So the car companies are investing in this technology. They want to make sure that they are building products that are responding to people at an unconscious level. So far, architects are not. And so there's a great opportunity here to get into this business and to try to understand people from the inside out. So it's really it's easier for the human brain to fixate on this traditional architecture. And this is what I've seen in this study I mentioned, in the New York one, and a couple other ones I've done. Consistently, this is what's coming up. That this traditional architecture, it's just easy to find things to look at. This is an example of a very new library that was built in New York City, and because of the way this facade is set up, you can't really look at it. You can't see it, basically. The human brain just really doesn't see the building. There's a little bit of an irony in the fact that the words search essentially light up, and they can move depending on sunlight or whatnot. I actually talked to the architect, and I was really impressed that effort was put in, because the designers wanted people to connect with it, but they never eye tracked it. They never used any kind of biometrics to understand how people would respond to it. And I can tell you this one on the left, this is an academic building at a very well-respected private school in Boston, Cambridge, and it was being threatened with being demolished. And when the alumni heard about it, well, they remembered this building, and they fought that. And they insisted, they made donations to make sure that building was not demolished. Instead, it was rehabilitated, fixed up. And anyone who might have wondered why, if you had simply done an eye tracking, you'd see that it looks like a face. They connected, these alumni, these donors, they connected with this building at an unconscious level. They remembered it. And I am pretty confident that when this building reaches its useful life, that you will not see such a emotional unconscious connection. So I'm really excited to share the news that I have a book that just came out. Actually, I literally today got it in the copy in the mail. Urban Experience and Design, Contemporary Perspectives on Improving the Public Realm. This is a book that I edited with my co-author from the Cognitive Architecture book, Ann Sussman. And what we've done here is we've shared some of the insights from some of the research I showed you here, but other papers that we've written, and brought in other authors as well. I guess we have about 15 contributors in this book, coming from all over the world, and together kind of trying to help really build maybe a new subfield within the built environment, this idea of urban experience and design. And so we use this a shorthand, UX and plus design, because those of you who are familiar with UX, that's in user experience, they shorten it by saying UX. User experience, in many ways, refers to like graphic design, website design. The notion that we want to know how a person uses a website or packaging or a movie theater poster. We want to know how they use it, how they interact with it as part of our design process. Well, architects simply don't do that. And neither do urban planners or urban designers. And so here we've created, this is a brand new library in Halifax. And my God, I mean, who would want to ever go to a place like that? But look over here on the right, this ancient Iranian temple is so welcoming, as is this new building, a new private home that was built by one of our contributors in the book, Don Ruggles, who's also an author himself. So when you start to pay attention to the user experience, it helps us kind of rethink what is it that we are even doing in these built environment fields. And so I think that urban experience and design helps us kind of rebrand and rethink about what these fields are and how the latest scientific tools for measuring human response can be part of the design process. And we can really create places that people connect to, find meaningful, buildings that people want to remember, that buildings they want to protect and preserve and invest in. So I really appreciate the invitation to come here. Thank you for your attention to this talk. I've listed here all my contact information. So I would love to hear any comments you might have, and if you have questions, definitely reach out, and I'm happy to respond. I would love to be able to join you guys maybe next year in person. This was certainly gratifying to be able to be part of this remote experience, but certainly there's nothing quite like the human connection. And if you are ever in Boston, definitely give me a ring. Thank you.